Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Future Contracts. I'm very excited to have Richard Tromans with me today. Richard and I go way back. I remember just being in contact with you since the very day I started on this legal innovation, legal tech path. So we've known each other for years, and we actually recorded a podcast when I was doing my first podcast back in my TLB days. So it's great to have the opportunity to talk to you again, Richard, and just talk about the enormous evolution that the legal tech market has witnessed over the past 7 years.
Oh, okay. How long have you got?
I've got an hour.
Okay. All right. We're going to need it. Okay. So I guess breaking it down, there's three key eras of legal tech. There's this incredibly slow, almost like sort of Precambrian evolutionary period where the amoebas turned into like little fishy amphibian things and then came out of the water, which kind of runs from about 1955 to sort of like mid 80s, which was at the birth of legal tech. Very, very, very early databases, very, very early stuff. And in fact, so old and so, in the past, it's hardly worth talking about. Get into late 80s, 90s, we get the first birth of real legal tech companies, digitization of law libraries, some of the early practice management tools and so forth. E-discovery starts to really look at technology. Well, e-discovery really starts to become a thing because very early forms of digital review. The legal world starts to digitize, right? To put it simply. But the legal tech market as such is still pretty tiny, right?
Mhm.
And the big beasts, the Wolters Kluwer, Thomson Reuters, the LexisNexis stuff, of course, well, Thomson Reuters came into existence later, but the big law library companies understood sort of almost instinctively, hold on a minute, we're sitting on a gold mine. We have all the books, we have all the precedents, we have everything, right? So they started to digitize that. And then, of course, you had the more basic stuff again, like, practice management, billing systems. It was all pretty mundane. The idea that you would actually use technology, not just to kind of help as a kind of digitized support for the lawyers, but the idea that it would actually change the way they worked, like really change the way they worked, literally transform the legal sector as a whole. And then with all the downstream effects that would have on the economics of law, that really hadn't appealed to many people. And then we kind of get to about 2015, 2016, and you get what I call, effectively, the real birth of legal tech for me anyway. That's when I came into it. And you had a huge surge of legal tech startups. And there was a whole bunch of reasons for this. One was the improvements in data storage, data transfer, the birth of early machine learning, natural language processing, which was pretty primitive even back then, had changed everything, really. I mean, everything's always relative, right? In 10 years, we'll be doing a video about 2022 and ChatGPT, and we'll be going, ChatGPT 2022, it was so basic. Like, now I've got a robot who cooks my lunch, kind of thing, It's always relative. But in 2015, 2016, what could be done was seen as extraordinary. And then there was and then equally on the investment side, investors started lining up to put money into startups. That money was like 100,000, 200,000, maybe $1 million. For some of the big companies, they were getting 20, 30 million, but these were like extraordinary deals. Everyone went like, oh my God, like 20 million, that's enormous. And then that kind of ticked over for a long, long, long time. And like people like me were going, particularly from 2016 onwards, were jumping up and down and going, look, this is it, the whole world's going to change, the whole world's going to change. And a lot of people just looked around their law firm and went, what on earth is that guy talking about? Like, we're still operating 99% exactly as we did in 1985 when we brought Windows in. In fact, the last big thing that actually ever happened to this law firm is when we started using redlining digitally and then sending it back via email. That was the first and last big thing that ever happened. And so this guy, artificial lawyer, what the hell's he on about? there's going to be a gigantic systemic transformation of the entire way that we operate, and the billable hour is going to go, and the pyramid, the leverage pyramid, is going to restructure, and relationships with clients will change, and ALSPs will sort of metamorphosize and alter, blah blah blah. Right? Which is these ideas that came to me pretty early on, and I'm don't claim to be original in most of that. This was built on the shoulders of giants that came before me, but I guess I tried to crystallize that at a time when the market was going bananas, and that's how Artificial Lawyer came into existence. Scroll forward to about 2022, it felt like things had sort of petered out. I went to Legal Geek, which everyone watching this will probably know, in I think September, because I think they changed the month that year. It was quite early, and I remember coming back and I wrote an article and I said, "My God, has legal tech plateaued?" I mean, I had a great time at Legal Geek. It's a great event, one of my favorite events of the year. Really nice to see everybody, but I just came out of it and I just thought, man, that could have been 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Nothing new at all. It was so dull. And I just thought, man, what's going to happen? And then, of course, ChatGPT arrived, and we're off to the races. And and then I went on sabbatical, and not much happened in 2023 because people were just talking about stuff. And in 2024, let's face it, is mostly just talking about stuff as well. Now things actually are starting to happen. So you could say now we have like the beginning of a fourth era, which is the generative AI era. And it's funny as well, because if you look in the background, I did a talk the other day for someone else about AI and the impacts, and I was looking at Alan Turing, and I think it's in 1952 or something like that. He wrote this seminal paper on AI, because obviously he invented the first major operational computer during World War II, and he said, "What if a machine could think?" And everyone said, "You're mad, you're a loony." And he just got absolutely pilloried by his academic rivals, who just said this is completely silly. And of course, scroll forward to 75 years. Now, are LLMs thinking? No, of course they're not thinking. It's just a bunch of digits, just a bunch of ones and zeros. But you could say if it quacks like a duck and it walks like a duck, it's a duck, right? So does it really matter? So, for example, right, I was just doing some research using my phone on ChatGPT. I was asking about what are the average running costs for a house in Europe as opposed to in London. And it became very conversational and chatty and gave me lots of interesting points. And then I said, "Thanks very much." And it signed off with an au revoir. Would you like me to compare Provence to Dordogne? And I didn't ask it to do that. I just said, "Thank you." And that has become normalized so quickly, right? And that's before we bring in agents, we bring in really complicated, reasoning models with curated data to back them up. So I guess if there's any takeaway from that ramble, is that we've been on an incredibly long journey, like a 75-year journey. It's interesting as well because the very, very first legal tech company, which was created by someone who eventually went on to help create LexisNexis. I can't remember what city it was, one of the large industrial cities in America. He was working in a big hospital and he wanted to see if they could digitize regulations around some kind of medical issue or medical needs. And that was, as far as I understand, the first legal tech company. And it was in like 1955 or something. And interestingly, not more than a couple of years before, Turing had written this seminal paper about AI. The two things were like 25 billion light years apart, right? If you'd said to this guy who eventually was like the you might say the amphibian, the ancestor, right, the Precambrian ancestor of legal tech, and then Turing in 52, like the Precambrian ancestor of, Sam Altman, right? Effectively, right? It's a 75-year gap, and also the 2 points were extremely far apart, right? But now the time has gone forwards, and the points have come together. So now we are at a completely different juncture. I mean, the rules have changed, and I think the problem is that a lot of the market tends to have. And I was on this panel the other day, And two of the speakers, they just had this like very, very kind of like absolutist view. Like one guy was saying, well, yeah, we don't have, this whole thing about general AI, we don't have like true intelligence, blah, 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 blah. So, it's all nonsense. And I was like, well, but there's like a spectrum between like being like a pocket calculator and something from a sci-fi film. There is like a middle distance between these two things. There can be stuff that's just genuinely really useful and drives productivity. And then another guy who used to own a e-discovery company was saying, yeah, but the problem with that being old school, and he was basically saying that LLMs are rubbish because they're not accurate. And it's like, well, was your e-discovery company completely accurate
Yeah.
always? No, obviously not. So there's I think one of the challenges is that we're not we have you might say we have the technology, but we don't necessarily actually have the metaphysical framework around it, the
Mm.
actual thinking, to put it very simply. We don't
Hmm.
have the thought, the discourse, the language around it, and so there's a tendency to leap from one extreme to another. We're either going to have the end of lawyers, or the whole thing is court. There's been huge progress. Even the machine learning stuff early on made huge progress. Like the skills group out in New York with Oz, they did a survey like what's the dominant due diligence tool, right, for the M&A deals. It's Kira, which is 99% natural language processing and so forth, which Noah and his team created like way pre 2015, goes back further. So like even then, even that technology has had an effect, and the technology we have now is going to have such a broad effect.
Yeah, and there's so much to unpack there, but I think that just one thing that I would say is that even though we had this kind of boom in legal tech and a boom in investment in legal
Mm,
tech from the VCs that didn't really care about legal tech beforehand, we did not actually see a true transformation of legal. Yes,
mm,
stuff was digitized and CLM was featured in a big way, particularly with these big investment rounds, but we didn't see lawyers fundamentally change the way they work. Whereas I think that
mm,
this AI is not just another tool, it's not hype. It is going
mm,
to be the next wave, much like electricity was. Not to
mm,
sound dramatic, but this is going to fundamentally transform the way we think about our value and the way we work, just the way we work as people, how we make our money. This is all going to change on such
mm.
a fundamental level. And I can just see it happening. And lawyers are still, not all of them, but a lot of them can't envisage how this is going to happen. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, 100%. Well, I wrote an article a while ago, and about some aspects of this. I think one of the biggest problems with legal tech is that legal tech thinks it's about them and it's about the lawyers.
Mm,
It's not, because a lot of legal tech companies were created by ex-lawyers, former
yeah,
lawyers, whatever, reformed lawyers, whatever, escapee lawyers, who then ironically, I hate big law, I want to get out. I know, let's build a company that sells only to big law, and I can
yeah.
then spend the rest of my life hanging out in big law. Strange, but that's life, right? And I think because of that, because lawyers are effectively the means of production. I want to get all sort of like Marxist analysis of economics. Um, I'm not a Marxist, but the Marxists were very good at analyzing capitalism. Their solution to the problems of capitalism were rubbish, right? Very, very silly response to it. But they understood the pyramid of labor very nicely. They understood technology and the control of the means of production and the ownership of means of production. Lawyers are really anachronistic. They're weird. They're like one of those like living fossil type things. Like a coelacanth, which they pulled up in the Pacific Ocean. They were like, my God, these things are meant to have died like 25 million years ago, and they're still here, right? In the lawyers effectively are the means of production, right? Until very, very recently, a lawyer, engages with the client personally. Documents are sent to them. They literally read them. All the information goes up into their neural pathways. They make decisions. They write responses. It goes back to the other side. Another lawyer goes through the whole process, right? Back and
Mm,
forth, back and forth.
mm,
Finally, it's all signed off. They're personally responsible.
yeah.
Literally, their flesh is is a forfeit, effectively. They are literally physically forfeit for the work of their minds in engaging with these issues, right? Which ultimately are just commercial issues, because 95% of the law is commercial anyway, right? Right. Even a divorce is commercial.
Mm.
Employment disputes, commercial. Dispute between two people in a suburb in Reading about a tree. Fundamentally, it's commercial, right? I own this, you don't own that, right? It's property, it's value, it's assets, right? The law is simple. The lawyers exist because we live in a rules-based society, and civilization functions more efficiently if you've got rules, right? So you need lawyers, but how the lawyers operate was never set. There's no book, right? When civilization was invented, right, by whoever who's sitting down one day who invented civilization, there wasn't like a clause saying, "Oh yes, and lawyers will have to operate in this way." They have just carried on operating that way,
Mm.
but it isn't their fault because none of the tech before could do what they could do. Right?
Yes.
Doc automation, pretty basic stuff, right? It's like replace that X with the name of the company all the way through the document. It's not like it doesn't radically change things. But now we've just come on so far. Like reasoning, or literally write me an employment contract, and it'll go beep.
Yeah.
Not a very good one. In fact, it'd be rubbish. But add some curated data, add some precedents, add a playbook. Now do it. Actually, that's pretty good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's crazy how far we've come from doc automation, which was pretty basic, if this, then that.
It was a can opener. It's comparing a can opener to literally having some kind of like automated chef in your kitchen.
Yeah, it is. It is that. And that's reflected also in the amount of money that's been pouring into this industry.
Mm,
So we've had some enormous news over the last few months that you've covered.
mm,
We've had the Harvey double raise in a year. We've
mm,
had the VLEX exit. We've had Legora raises. So I'd love to hear your take on all of
mm.
that. And if you could also just give us a quick snapshot of what's gone on this year.
Yeah. Well, so basically, as everyone knows, so like Harvey, Legora, and a bunch of other companies who you might say were Gen AI first
Mm.
came into being almost a few months after ChatGPT was launched because people saw it, went, my God, they applied it to legal work and went, this is it, off to the races, and boom, they went. Um, but the key part here is a lot of this is being driven, I think, by just a few individuals, many of them in California, not all. Like the Clio VLEX had a very strong Canadian aspect to it, but there are, so for example, like Y Combinator and others who've invested around California, right? And then of course Harvey, some of its big investors are out there as well. OpenAI itself, Sequoia, and others. And I think some like key investors who are probably not talking about this publicly, my gut feeling is what's different now is that they are looking at the legal tech market, the legal market, and just going, why are there no fundamental category winners here? Right, you've got your great big data stores, you've got your Lexis and your TR, right? And they've got a bunch of tools floating around the edges. But there's no like there's no like legal tech Microsoft. I mean, how many lawyers are there in the world? 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 million? I don't know.
I thought it was
There's
20, but I'm probably
It
wrong.
could be. It could be. It could be. I mean, there's like there's a million in the US. There's a million in Brazil. There's 110,000 in the UK or something. I don't know. I can't remember the numbers. But let's say 10 million, right? How many of them have advanced AI tools on their desktop? Tiny percentage at the moment, I would
Mm-hmm.
guess. Even though like artificial law and all the other legal press are just churning out stories about this firm and that firm. If you look at it as a whole, right? Let's say there's 10 million lawyers. How many of those 10 million lawyers have a mobile phone?
Most
This is from San Jose to Edinburgh to Shanghai, right?
90%.
Yeah, 99%, I'd guess. How many of them have Microsoft Word? I mean, they use it.
95%.
Yeah. Exactly. How many use calendars? How many use redlining functions? How
Yeah.
many do all of these things?
You can't do your job without it, really, unless you're writing with a quill.
Yeah, exactly. Because they digitized it, and then okay, now not all of them, amazingly, even now have access to digitized law libraries, mainly because they don't want to pay for it.
Yeah.
But why isn't there a product? So what is Microsoft? Right, it's a productivity suite. Right, it enables you to write, to edit, and to send your stuff, and then get it back. Fundamentally, certainly even in a commercial context. Right, you can create a document, you can edit it, you can communicate, you can share it, and then you can send it to the other party, and then you can store it. It's basically it. Yeah, but it's fairly limited in what it can do. It's kind of like it's fairly dumb, right? It has no specialized knowledge, right? You can spell check it, but you can't say is that a good change of control clause? Does that change of control clause match the last 25 we did at our law
Yes.
firm? Does it conform to the latest change in the law? Are there any court cases recently that you can see that relate to this? Da, 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 right? It's lacking all of that, right? But a lot of that is knowledge based. Why isn't there a legal component that you can slot into this digitized world?
Mm.
Right. So if there's 10 million lawyers, that's 10 million desktops with this thing on it. And I think these people are starting to think in those terms now, because I think a lot of legal tech has had, I think its ambitions have been relatively small.
Yeah.
They've gone, I mean, I've met people, I mean, I know companies who started when I started Artificial Lawyer, whose revenues are still in single million digits, right?
Mm.
Which you might say, well, that's fantastic. Yeah, but how many software startups after almost a decade, right, which haven't gone bust, are still only making about 5 million a year,
Yeah. But
right?
is that related to the TAM being, in fact, a lot smaller than the legal techs are purporting that it is to their VCs?
Well, part of it is that. Part of it is also the cost of sales. You see, because I mean, to reach those 10, to put it very simply, imagine trying to sell a book. That you write a book, right, and you want to get it in front of 10 million people. You're going to have to market wise, unless you've got some amazing viral organic sales thing on TikTok, right? You're going to have to market the hell out of that, and to market to 10 million people, it's an enormous investment. And probably 85% of that marketing will fail. Maybe 95% of it will fail. And people just don't have the cash to do that, right? I mean, if you look at say Harvey, Legora, and others who've got an absolute ton of money recently, some of it's going into engineering, but an enormous chunk of it is going into marketing and sales.
Of course.
Huge. The GTM team at some of
Most,
these companies is just going like that.
yeah.
And this is what some of the earlier legal tech startups, 2015, 2016, so forth, they grew organically, really. Very, very, very small teams, and partially, it goes back to your earlier point, but the tech just wasn't good enough. It's hard to get outside of the top 20 or 30 in the UK to buy into that tech when they don't see the reason to.
Mm.
They don't have a volume. They don't have the volume. They don't feel the pressure from the clients. Maybe the clients are not into legal tech either. And that's the other thing that's changed. I haven't talked about that, which is the clients have changed.
Mm-hmm.
I remember the very, very first time I went to an in-house conference in 2016. It was the summer of 2016. Artificial Lawyer had been going about 2 months. It was a very small, stuffy room, and the GC of a FTSE 100 listed company stood up and said, "I feel sorry for any lawyer that has to deal with technology." And he
Wow.
meant it. He
Yeah,
meant it. He
I'm sure
fully
he
meant it.
did.
And there was like a bravo, you know.
Mm-mm.
And I just thought, oh man, this is gonna. I think I've overestimated how quickly things are going to change. Oh
Yeah.
my God, was I right on that? I mean, the yeah, I mean, and that has changed. Though. That has fundamentally. I mean, of course, I mean, a lot of in-house people, their first experience of legal tech beyond very, very basic tools was CLM, which,
Mm.
let's face it, wasn't the most glorious experience.
No, it
Certainly
wasn't.
CLM V1. CLM now has morphed and evolved incredibly rapidly, and he's no different to a whole bunch of other products out there. But that first wave, let's face it, wasn't great. So they weren't particularly. They hadn't really bought into legal tech themselves. So why should they put any pressure on their external advisors to do so either.
Mm.
Right, and some of them did play with those early tools, and in-house in-house legal teams don't really do due diligence, right? It's what you sent out externally, so they wouldn't normally have been playing with stuff like Kira anyway. And although machine learning and natural language processing was added to the back end of Lexis and Westlaw, they probably weren't even aware of that.
Mm.
So there wasn't really a lot of engagement, but generative AI has really changed that. I really noticed that probably about, I don't know, a few months after I got back from my sabbatical, and I did a panel, and there was someone from Boston Consulting Group and someone from Coke Industries, and both of them were just probably at that point were probably further ahead in the AI journey than some of the law firms in the audience.
Mm.
And that had never happened. I just suddenly went, bing, that's different. So the clients had always been quite reticent for a bunch of different reasons, as explained just before. But now it felt like they were ahead, and I think that has really, really, really changed the dynamic, because the tech works; they get value very quickly now. And also, I mean, internally, a lot of the contracts that sort of in-house legal teams are dealing with, they're not necessarily simple. It's what I call routine but complex.
Mm.
And if you think about, the human world, a lot of it is routine but complex.
Yeah, it is.
Driving a car is very routine, but it's also complex.
Yeah,
We
it
do it
is.
so often, we don't think about the fact we're traveling at 70 miles an hour, and
Yeah.
we're in a 1-ton lump of metal surrounded
Mm.
by other 1-ton lumps of metal traveling at equal speeds, and at any moment there could be a catastrophic,
Hmm.
right? But we
Hmm.
don't think about that. We just go, complex but routine, right? And that's what a lot of in-house legal teams are doing.
Yeah.
Sales contracts, procurement contracts, etc., right? Employment disputes, which they've done a million of, right, in the last
Hmm.
20 years. That work is extremely amenable to generative AI, because they
Totally.
can build up very, very detailed playbooks, and then they can
Yeah.
get value really fast, and then they can
Mm.
do self-serve and a whole bunch of different things. And then managing these things is a lot easier, because the context windows are so enormous now. You could shovel in like a year's worth of contracts and just go through it in like 10 seconds, or maybe not, maybe 10 minutes, but still, I mean, then as we start to bring in agents, which can perform tasks for you, and then deeper reasoning models. So basically, what has stopped AI from really changing legal was because the tech wasn't good enough, and then on the very, very complex, very high risk work, you were kind of worried about it, and quite rightly so. But the less risky work, the less complex work, the more routine it gets, the more AI is amenable, right?
Mm.
So to me, it's like, once the clients change, their expectations change. The clients are always going to externalize risk, right? So there will never be an end of lawyers ever, even in 1,000 years, right? Well, unless business changes out of all recognition, because all corporate entities seek to externalize risk, right? There's an economic function there, right?
Mm.
Lawyers exist fundamentally to absorb risk and to kill the risk. Right, they do that through having great resources, through having experience, through having proprietary knowledge, through having connections, through having gone to the right university. They play squash with the judge, so they're more likely to win the case. All these huge, vast, complex, from the most sort of basic empirical scientific reasons to social networks and influence networks and so forth, and politics,
Mhm.
basically. So these things will always exist. So maybe law firms at the end of the day, in far, 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 far future, 50 years from now, will just be a very, very small group of people who are
Yeah.
super
I think.
experienced, super connected,
Yeah.
and they're just using an absolute orchestra of technology,
Mm.
to get things done. But the clients will still go to them. But anyway, scrolling back, the, the there's two sides to it, right? So I think internally, corporates will become more and more and more focused on saving money, because for them, they don't make money through time. So why not use it, right? So the law firms, eventually, the camel's back is going to break. right? This
Mm.
cannot go on forever. It simply cannot. Or you go the other way, which is a thought I had the other day, which is, okay, keep the billable hour, but anything that doesn't have to be on the billable hour is free. And the billable hours that you do charge are 25 times what you charge currently.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
but anyway, we're going completely off piece. But anyway, the point is that the clients are going to change. There's a huge economic incentive for them to change. The work that they do internally is perfect for the AI that we have today,
Yeah.
and that in turn is going to put lots and lots of pressure on the external lawyers. And then this meets simultaneously this huge flood of money, which is being pushed into the legal tech market to build category leaders in the hope of putting one of these tools onto every lawyer's desktop on the planet.
Mm.
I mean, people are looking at like Harvey's 5 billion valuation and going, "Whoa, it's incredible." I bet you, I don't know this, I'm guessing the people who are putting the money into that are thinking, this is just the beginning. We want 20 times that. I mean, really, I'm not even kidding. I mean,
Oh no.
I genuinely think that's what they're thinking. They're
Yeah.
thinking, this is going to, look, law is one of the great pillars of the economy, right? It's not
Mm.
the biggest pillar. Pharmaceuticals is probably 100 times bigger,
Yeah.
right? But no one owns it. No one owns this. No one owns this market yet. You've got, like I say, you've got the two big data stores, and that's all they've got. Okay,
Yeah.
they've got some like frilly productization around the edges, but
Hmm.
its impact is still minimal.
Yeah.
So basically, this is what it all boils down to. There's just this gigantic future battle. I think Jack Newton at Clio put it well. He said basically, I'm thinking about the next decade. And I think the people who are the leaders in this industry are thinking now. They've got like
Mm.
10-year timescales looking
Hmm.
ahead, and they're thinking huge scale. And this is why we come back to the data, because, earlier in the conversation, the bit about Microsoft Word is amazing, but the one thing it doesn't have is all the data, the knowledge,
Mm.
right? Past precedents, case law, and so forth. That is the thing, you see, is that can't be replicated,
Hmm.
right? Well, not legally anyway, right? Um, you can't just like say to Thomson Reuters, "Give me all your data." Right, it's theirs. Right. Okay, but some of it is public, but a lot of it isn't. And even the stuff that is public, they've curated it over
Hmm.
decades. Right, they've
Hmm.
tagged it, they've built knowledge graphs around it. Right, um, that's a really, really interesting. And I think that is probably why the price for VLEX was so insanely high. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, the total revenue numbers that I've seen were a very, very small fraction of $1 billion.
Hmm.
Very, very, very small fraction.
Hmm.
So it just shows how important the data is.
Yeah. Clearly.
Yeah.
So, so Clio's now acquired Vlex for a
Mm.
billion.
Yeah.
Harvey's doing a deal or has done a deal with Lexis.
An alliance. Only we should always stress it's only an alliance. Yeah.
Yeah. So they're leveraging Lexis's data. I'm
Mm.
assuming. Then we have Spellbook that's had an alliance with Reuters.
Yeah,
Am I?
that's a funny one, and I'm not privy to the inside track on that, but that will leave that. I mean, Thomson Reuters has a long, history of getting chummy with different companies,
Mm,
and then it either buys them or they kind of part ways.
yeah. But are we looking at a very likely consolidation of the market where it all kind of rests with two to three main players?
Well, that's what they want. I mean, I don't. I wouldn't see necessarily a consolidation of the whole market. What I think we'll see, what they're trying to do, if my read of this is correct, is that they're trying to build 4 or 5 dominant players
Mm,
who will be on everybody's desktop.
mm,
That will be like level one. Below that, there'll be a mass of point solutions and specialized solutions. So, maybe some of the best e-discovery companies will stay independent. And perhaps even, particularly in the US, maybe there's even ethical things there around keeping the e-discovery bit completely separate. Who knows?
hmm.
CLM companies, well, the ones that don't evolve are going to get squished. And it'll be really interesting to see. I mean, Lexis bought Parley Pro a few years ago,
Yes.
which was a small, but wasn't like super cutting edge company for CLM. It'd be interesting to see what happens with the CLM players. But to be honest, at the moment, the focus is a marriage between legal data and what you might call productivity platforms. So, like Harvey Lagora.
Yeah.
So, bring us in, we will help you with literally every aspect of your legal work, other than
Hmm.
e-discovery and some of the other very, very specialized pathways.
Hmm.
And then you've got your data stores, your you might say internal data stores. So you've got your iManagers and your net documents over here, and then you've got your business of law stuff. You've got your billing software, your practice management software. So it's actually not a very complex ecosystem. There's only like 5 or 6 moving parts, really.
Hmm.
It's compared to some markets, it's actually not that multifaceted. Like I
It's
said, we're
not.
looking at five to six zone, depending on how you count it, elements. But the big deal now is data productivity. But actually, that's one of the interesting things about Lexis. Sorry, not Lexis, with VLEX and Clio, because Clio has been very much on the business of law, practice management stuff. They didn't have the data, and they didn't have the big productivity suite either. VLEX had the data, and it was building out a productivity suite. You could have argued that if the owners of VLEX had gone completely all in and rustled up $1 billion of their own, they could have just, 10x the revenue of VLEX and just said, we don't need to merge with anybody. Let's just do that. Right. They could have, they decided not to. Possibly because, and I think this is the thing we keep forgetting is that, all of these companies have owners, right? The people who you see on the screen, sometimes they may only have a tiny percentage of the company,
Yeah.
right? I mean, the people behind, they want to. I mean, other times it's not. Sometimes the person you see actually owns the majority still.
Mm.
I would have thought these days that's fairly rare, considering the
I think
funding
so.
rounds are so big. They must be giving away tons, tons of
Yeah.
equity. So it's like, yes, I mean, I think that's one of the stories we don't really think about enough is that what do the people behind these companies want?
Mm.
What's their vision? Because
Yeah.
it's like in politics, there's a bunch of people who are not elected who have tremendous power and influence who then we might say they elect or try to elect the people they want, who then become the leaders, who then become effectively their PR people. So like governments to some degree almost like PR people for a different bunch of people who are not in
Yeah.
the headlines always. And to some degree that's kind of the same with legal tech. A lot of the legal tech companies are sending out their messages, but those messages are designed to generate revenue so that they can grow the companies to achieve the goals of the people who own them.
Hmm.
And I mean, I suppose it's a bit like Adam Smith's invisible hand. It doesn't matter. So, I mean, the people who own certain legal tech companies may only be thinking, well, I just want to make as much money as possible, right? And then I'm going to get into pharma or robotics next. I don't care. I don't care. I don't care if the fact that it's about lawyers. Like, this is just an opportunity for me.
Mm. Well,
And that's
absolutely.
okay because
Yeah.
that's the invisible hand. They're trying to make a profit. They see what they think is a gigantic opportunity, which is to put their favored company onto every desktop of 10 million lawyers, and they're just going to go for it. But I think that's where things are changing. I was talking to someone this morning who runs an AI company. It's just done a big funding round, and we were talking about the difference between that 2015, 2016, and the new era. It's a bit, that stuff about like in the old days of the gentleman amateur.
Mm.
That if you were a tennis player at Oxford or Harvard, you weren't expected to play professionally. Because gentlemen didn't, run around trying to make money because they were gentlemen, whatever, completely of its time. And then, of course, that just disappeared, and you had that professionalization and financialization of sport. And it was just like, there's huge money to be made here.
Mm.
Like you get UEFA and the World Cup and everything, right? And football players being paid like $300 million and stuff, right? It's the same. I think the same thing is now happening with legal tech. There were a lot of people who'd been at Freshfields or Clifford Chance and they'd left, probably had a fair amount of money in their bank balance, and they did a quick whip around with friends and family. And they started a legal tech company, and they've probably got to 5, 10, 20 million revenue, and they're probably feeling pretty happy with that.
Mm.
And then, like around the corner, there's a bunch of people, some of which have no legal background, some of which have a very short legal background, and have just gone all in with generative AI. And they're not thinking, well, wouldn't it be great to get to 10 million revenue? They're thinking, wouldn't it be great to get to $1 billion
Oh yeah.
revenue?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Richard, last question, and it's been great to just hear you download all your thoughts, having been such a close observer of the market over the years.
Mm.
If you had a crystal ball,
Mm.
where is the legal market going to be in the next 5 years? So it's 2030. What does the legal tech landscape look like?
Well, I think the legal landscape will look remarkably similar in 5 years.
Interesting.
My bet, and I've shared this publicly, my bet is 2037 for the watershed moment.
Right.
So 12 more years, unfortunately. So if you're watching this, if you can just hang on for another decade and a bit, everything will become clear. I know I'd love to say, yeah, don't worry, in another couple. Honestly, just do a tour of the law firms of London, even ones that look very cool and are up to date and have heads of innovation and heads of AI. Walk around, walk their floors, talk to people, and you'll be like, yeah, maybe 12 years is actually pretty optimistic, right? I think what will happen is it's basically what I term it the capsize argument,
Mm.
which is that opposition isn't effectively beaten; it's just capsized. That it's a bit like where I live in London, near there's a up the road there's a place called the Village, right? But if you actually look on a map, it's like surrounded by like 25 miles of urban sprawl in all directions, right? Probably more than that. But that is the Village. And you might say that is the traditional legal market. Like, we're
Yeah.
going to do the billable hour, we're going to operate the way we've always operated. AI is just a tool, it's just a little assistant, it'll be a gopher, it'll do some stuff for us. Nothing will ever change, everything will carry on, right? But the world around it just changes, and it changes so much that eventually the Village just gets subsumed into it, gets capsized, right? And it's I think that's probably the most likely scenario, because law firms do not have a burning platform, right? And that's completely understandable. They're centers of excellence, they're centers of knowledge and expertise. They work incredibly long hours. They're full of very smart people. They're people who are good at managing projects, people who are good at negotiating, all of these things, right? And they take risk, they absorb risk. And I keep coming back to risk. In-house lawyers, well, they have a tough job too, but literally the entire firm's reputation could land on screwing up a deal, a big
Mm.
deal, right?
Yeah.
And they handle this, they deal with it, right? Huge pressure. I don't think that is that kind of world, which is very highly paid as well, naturally tends towards self-disruption, because why would it? Right? It's a very lean, tough, profitable way of living, right? Very
Mm.
stressful, very demanding, burns people out, chews people up. 80% of all junior lawyers who join a big law firm get ejected, whether they like it or not,
Hmm.
right? I mean, it's mad. What a model. Some of the brightest and the bestest people who have like $500,000 of debt, who scrabble and fight their way into these firms. They work for 3 or 4 years, almost kill themselves working, and then they say, "Thank you, bye, don't need you anymore. On to the
Fascinating.
next one." They are incredible creations, right? And you know, which is why I don't actually think that any very successful law firm will ever choose to disrupt itself
Of course it won't.
until it's
Has
capsized.
to. Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. And what about, just in the last few minutes, what about in-house? How is that going to change in the
They're going to
next?
change enormously. But the biggest problem with in-house, as you know, and you worked in-house, is that the in-house people came from big law,
Yeah.
in many cases, right? Because as far as I don't, maybe you can these days, but as far as I understand, you can't go from law school into in-house. I think some big in-house teams do training
Yeah.
contracts, don't they?
Yeah. It's still the norm to do the big law route.
Exactly. So it's 6 minutes on your timesheet. If you mess up your timesheet, you're finished here, right? I mean, that is drilled into you, that time equals value. That value, the denominator of value is how much time a group of humans spend doing something.
Mm.
which is completely bonkers, isn't it, when you think about it?
It is. It
I mean,
is.
if 2,000 well-built rugby players pushed a train from London to Luton, right? Would you measure? Would you say, well, that's a great use of human effort? You say, why do we put an engine on the train and we can say goodbye to the rugby players and they can all go off and do something else? And
It's smart.
you know,
Yeah.
and because it's so efficient, thousands and thousands of people will use this train. So we don't actually have to charge tens of thousands. We can just charge like 20 quid.
Mm.
And hey, wow, we have an economy, right? I mean, it's going to be really tough to break that.
Mm.
I mean, I'd like to say that the in-house lawyers are going to drive this. I don't think that they are also part of this culture. I mean, they they strangely have not particularly great incentives to change either.
Mm.
They should, on paper, anyone who works inside a corporate should have maximum incentives to do everything they can to save money for the business.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But legal has managed to be almost immune to that.
Yeah.
Despite all the monthly reports from one of the big four that blah 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 blah. In-house legal teams have never had to do so much with so little. There's so much pressure on blah 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 blah. They do that, of course, because it's marketing for their consulting division,
Mm-hmm.
who they can go in and make money from doing that. Which, of course, all power to them. But it's just a marketing spiel, right? In reality, the vast majority of in-house legal teams are spending more money than they were the year before, and probably
Yeah,
will
they are.
next year.
Yeah.
So again, I think they'll be capsized. I think they'll probably capsize sooner.
Mm.
They'll capsize sooner. But it's a brave, as someone from one of the big four said to me once years ago, they said it's a brave, most CEOs only stay in position for 1 to 2 years. And then they're on to the next job and another gigantic golden handshake and then a golden parachute on the way out again. The first thing they try to do is save money. Maybe do a merger to put their name on something, leave a legacy. So you're a new CEO, you come in or you've just been promoted up if you're lucky. And you're sitting there at your desk with all your VPs around you and you're like, right, who should we pick a fight with? I know, let's pick a fight with the legal department who literally save my butt every single day, right? And you're like, yeah, maybe not. Let's outsource reception to the Philippines. Let's close down the factory, in England because it's way too expensive. Let's outsource that to Mexico, right? I mean, those are the kind of decisions that they'll push on, right? Will will everything get automated so much? Will AI eventually work its way through all of these businesses so much even the in-house legal team cannot resist? And actually, that could be the precursor for then capsizing the rest of the legal market. Because once the in-house legal teams have been subsumed into the new, approach, then the external advisors go to. It's going to be really fascinating. And then of course, we could talk about Jevons paradox, the increase. Will there be an increase in lawyers in total or a decrease? Or do we have an increase in legal work but a decrease in lawyers?
Yeah. Yeah. It will be so fascinating to kind of watch the Hunger Games commence. Richard, it's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and wisdom.
Thank you.
And I'm going to go away and think about this now. But be great to see what happens over the next few years and how this market evolves even further.
Yeah, it's going to keep evolving. It's going to keep evolving. Absolutely. And it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. Thanks, everyone, for listening. Make sure to tune in for the next episode of Future Contracts. Take care.